Hey everyone, how's it going? Aaron Rift here, along with good old JM, Jeff Meacham, to discuss the greatest WWE Tag Team Champions of the world.
Well, yes and no, because some of them are former World Tag Team Champions, and some of them are former WWE Tag Team Champions. And you're sitting at home if you're an old school fan going, what's the freaking difference?
Yeah, I know.
Because Aaron and I came in and Aaron goes, are they different titles now? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks to WWE messing them up 5 years ago, they are.
Yeah, you're the encyclopedia.
No, that's true, yeah, you know.
I really don't pay much attention to the championship lineages as much as some people.
Right.
So I had completely forgotten that the current WWE Tag Team Champions, they do not have the same lineage as
the World Tag Team Championship.
The title belts that were held by the Hart Foundation and Demolition
we were kids,
and the New Age Outlaws. They're different.
Although the Outlaws did hold the new belts.
Yeah. So it's confusing.
It is, but I decided to just go ahead and keep the lineage of the new belts up, which started October 20, 2002 at No Mercy with Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit. And then Aaron remembers the old stuff, so we'll just go ahead and kind of Batman her off each other and, talk about... There's been more great World Tag Team Champions, let's be honest. As far as the lineage, it goes back in 1971 with, let me just double check that. Gotch and Tyler, I believe, is who it was. But, there's been great champions throughout history as far as the WWE Tag Team title belts are concerned. Yeah, Graham and Tyler. When you talk about champions, we were growing up, Aaron, you and I. You watched before I did, but I believe when you started watching champions with the Hart Foundation, is that true?
British Bulldogs.
British Bulldogs, okay.
Well, let's start off with the champions of the 1970s, and this is before our time.
Right,
but,
of course.
The most dominant tag team, perhaps, of the 1970s was the Valiant Brothers.
They were the first tag team to go in the Hall of Fame.
And they held the titles for a combined 370 days. Actually, they only had one reign, but it was a very lengthy reign.
Just over a year, yeah.
And they held the record until Demolition in the 80s, and we'll get to Demolition in a minute here.
Definitely.
And they were managed by the manager of champions, the great Captain Louis Albano.
Who managed, I think, every other champion on this
during
list.
The 1970s.
During the 70s, yeah. And also the 80s with the Samoans.
So really, he was the big star of the tag team division, and he was the manager.
He was. You had him managing the Valiant. You had him managing. I believe he managed Fuji and Tanaka too, didn't he?
I believe so. I don't want to say that for sure.
I'm not sure either.
Once again, this is before my time.
Yeah, before our time. But yeah, Mr. Fuji and Professor Tanaka are on here. Mr. Fuji has the longest combined time with the World Tag Team titles as an individual. He held it for forever.
Yeah, him and Tanaka held it 3 times, 569 days combined. It's hard to think of Mr. Fuji as a great tag team wrestler because us younger fans remember him as the manager in the tuxedo.
It's hard to think of us as younger fans, too.
Yeah, exactly.
We are now. But,
so moving on to the 1980s, the Wild Samoans were perhaps the most dominant team of the early 1980s.
Absolutely.
With Captain Lou Albano once again managing them.
Yeah, and Afa was so good as a tag team wrestler, he went on to manage his family later on in the 90s. And, Afa went on, along with Captain Lou Albano. Afa and Sika were the dominant team of the early 80s prior to the real golden age of wrestling starting. Because Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas beat them in the fall of '83, and that's when the WWF really started to take off.
Right. Before
then, it was the teams in the 70s and then the Samoans. The Samoans ruled with an iron fist, man. They were crazy. They were just a dominant tag team championship team.
Absolutely.
Great.
And then we had the rock and wrestling era, and the great era, I believe, of the tag team division really started around this time.
I agree.
The golden age, when you had the British Bulldogs winning at WrestleMania 2, going on to hold the titles for, I believe, the rest of '86. They lost, I believe it was the beginning of '87 when they lost to the Hart Foundation, one of the greatest tag teams of all time. Hart Foundation had 2 title reigns, 483 days combined as champions, and they had the best matches during that period in the tag team division. So many classic matches with the Bulldogs, and then later on with Demolition. And Demolition, a tag team that was basically designed to be the WWE's version of the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors.
Before the Road Warriors came over.
And it's so sad because in history, WWE has largely ignored Demolition ever since LOD actually came into WWE. But
yeah, I found that funny. Like, well, you know, between the fact that the Road Warriors came over and then Axe getting either hurt or sick,
he was sick,
so they phased him out in favor of Bryan Adams' Crush. Once the LOD came over, they were kind of just like pushed into the background. I remember the last great showcasing, if you want to call it great showcasing, was SummerSlam 1990 when they lost the titles to the Hearts.
Yeah, that was one of my all-time favorite SummerSlam matches.
Great match, and then they had a throwaway smash and crush day with two Japanese guys, Tenryu and
yeah, that was just such
a waste.
Yeah, such a downer. Demolition. When I was a kid growing up, they were my favorite tag team. I loved them. And they dominated the tag team scene. They broke the record at that time, 478 days
as World Tag Team Champions. Yes. That was unheard of.
And actually, they had 3 reigns combined. They held the titles for 698 days.
That's like almost 2 years.
That is Demolition domination, right?
Demolition domination. That's right. And you know, you mentioned the Hart Foundation winning the belts back after Demolition traded back and forth with the Brain Busters and with the Colossal Connection, and the Hearts really were the last great tag team champions of the 90s until the Attitude Era, I think, personally.
Yeah.
I mean, you had teams like the Smoking Guns who were fairly good. You had teams...
Well, Smoking Guns had 3 reigns.
Right.
So they were a pretty dominant tag team. You had Legion of Doom, you know, one of the greatest tag teams of all time, but were they really great WWE tag team champions?
And I was just going to say, the LOD were brought in, they were touted as the greatest tag team of all time by most experts, but they only held, their first run only went 165 days.
Yeah.
In 1991-92, and they lost to, who I think is a really good... almost at first a throwaway tag team, but they ended up being really good. Money Incorporated, Ted DiBiase and Ron Shyster. You know, and well, both of them, especially Ron Shyster, Mark Rotunda was a proven tag team champion in the past. They didn't acknowledge that, of course, because he was a gimmick then. But he was a great tag team wrestler. You had him. You brought in the Steiner brothers to feud with them. You had Earthquake and Typhoon feuding with them. You know, they were good tag team champions between the end of the Hart Foundation's reign and the start of the Attitude Era, but there weren't great tag team champions, in my personal opinion.
I totally agree. Yeah, and LOD had their second run in 97.
Right.
And that was a really short run, and that was ended by what many people would consider to be the greatest tag team of all time.
Yep.
As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the WWF Tag Team Champions of the World.
It's so funny. I'm watching the Attitude Era Raws right now. I just finished watching the Night for the King of the Ring last night before I came over. And the Outlaws just hit their stride at that time in 97, 98. They were awesome. And you know what? They came back last year, whatever it was, early part of last year. They were still awesome.
Yeah.
The Outlaws held both versions. They held the World Tag Team Championship, and they held the current WWE Tag Team Championship that started in 2002. And Billy Gunn, at 51 years old, was still proving he could be a great tag team wrestler. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, they're great. You know, we kind of skipped over the mid '90s. Great tag team wrestlers, which surprised me, as far as was Camp Cornette, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, and Yokozuna.
Yeah.
Those 3 guys, in whatever combination you wanted them as a team, were really good as tag team champions. But you know, they were overshadowed by the gimmickry that was Jim Cornette, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, you know, you had them, you know, and then you had the gimmick, you had the Godwins, and you had the Smoking Guns, and you had that brief interaction with Austin holding the titles with Michaels and then with Dude Love.
The problem here is that the titles were changing hands so many times. You'd have like 20-day, 30-day runs, a lot of short reigns and going back and forth, and people would switch partners, like you said. First it was Austin with Shawn Michaels, and then Austin with Dude Love, and then X-Pac would team with Kane, and then X-Pac would team with Road Dogg, and you know, you just had all these different combinations.
You had the WWF champion and the #1 contender for the title, Austin and Undertaker, being tag team champions for 15 days.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
It made no sense. And then you had the tag team champions, Kane and Mankind, turning on each other in favor of the Outlaws at SummerSlam in '98.
Well, this was all part of the Vince Russo portion of the
Shock
WWE
TV
Attitude Era.
Exactly.
But after Russo left, we started to see a new golden age of tag team wrestling in WWE.
And it all comes down to 3 teams. Edge and Christian, the Hardys, and the Dudleys. I was on Twitter throughout the course of the weekend, and the Young Bucks mentioned how if it wasn't for those three teams, there would be no Young Bucks.
Absolutely.
And watching the Young Bucks like we did at PWG over the course of the last few years and seeing how far they've come and how dominant they've become in Japan and Ring of Honor and things like that, it really makes you go, wow, these guys that we grew up watching, we were teenagers, have an impact still in the business today. But Edge and Christian, the Hardys and Dudleys, with their TLC matches and the various other matches they had with each other and all three teams involved, and you had the other teams coming in, Too Cool and things like that. It just, the tag team division from about 98 till, I want to say the brand extension, even still there were still good teams in the brand extension era, but those 4 years were really solid for WWE, WWF tag team wrestling.
Yeah, it made tag team wrestling exciting again.
It did. It really did.
Because before that, you had like the Godwins and DOA in the tag division. It wasn't really that exciting to watch.
Right.
But once you had these tag teams come in, the tag matches would often be the most anticipated matches on the card.
It was main event of SmackDown for the tag team titles. You had the Unholy Alliance against the Rock and Sock Connection.
Yeah.
In the Buried Alive match that we talked about not too long ago when we did the show.
Yeah.
That match main event in SmackDown because it was about the tag team titles and it was about a personal rivalry that was involving those 4 guys, and it was awesome.
Yeah, all right. So in 2002, we had the brand extension, and so we had new WWE tag team titles introduced in addition
on SmackDown because the World Tag Team titles had been made exclusive to Raw. So you had the champions of Raw and Stephanie McMahon, the GM of SmackDown, was going, wait a minute, we need our own belts too, just like much like the later Intercontinental and U.S. Championship split.
Yeah.
In 2003, Stephanie introduced these belts that kind of look like a combination of tag team titles and the European title, the blue belts, the infamous blue belts. And the first champions, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit, won a huge tournament that was conducted all over SmackDown and led up to No Mercy. It was Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit against great tag team champion in his own right, Edge, a 12-time World Tag Team Champion, and Rey Mysterio.
Yeah.
And that team, Angle, Benoit, and Los Guerreros, Eddie and Chavo, had a huge run from about October till about December of 2002, where they traded it back and forth. It was great, solid tag team wrestling all throughout the rest of that year. It was awesome.
And then shortly after that, you had the world's greatest tag team come into the mix.
Yes, Team Angle, Benjamin and Haas. You know, those guys ruled SmackDown as WWE Tag Team Champions. But also over on Raw, you had other teams that were still holding the World Tag Team titles. The Dudleys were still around, holding the tag team titles. You had Jericho and Christian. You had, I believe the APA was champions in 2000. I'm going through here and do. Billy and Chuck were the champions at the time the belt split.
Yeah.
Billy and Chuck were a dominant tag team champion. You had Hurricane. That's what they call him, Hurricane.
Hurricane, Jericho.
Jericho. Well, Jericho was the unified tag team champion later.
Yeah, but all these teams like.
But yeah, Booker T and Goldust were champions on Raw. You had the original really good team of Regal and Lance Storm, and then Regal got really sick with that disorder. So Val Venus, Chief Morley took over and teamed with Lance Storm. They were good. The Dudleys, RVD and Kane, La Resistance. La Resistance was one of the more dominant last World Tag Team Champions going into the later part of the early 2000s. Evolution held the titles a couple times, Batista and Ric Flair, Booker T and Rob Van Dam. Again, he's not a popular name to mention, I know, but Chris Benoit held the titles twice with Edge.
Right.
Even when he and Edge were starting to feud as World Tag Team Champions, they still held it. Eugene held it. Rio held it a couple times. Eugene and Tajiri.
There's a lot of teams.
There's a lot of teams on the World Tag Team title side. And then over on SmackDown, you had guys like London and Kendrick who were holding the titles dominantly for 331 days, I believe.
Well, yeah, I think definitely the WWE titles, that was more memorable because you had teams like London and Kendrick. You had Eminem.
3-time tag team champions, yes,
yeah,
sir.
3 times, 291 days. Yeah. I felt that the tag division was stronger on SmackDown, and those titles were on SmackDown.
Yes, yeah, right? Yeah. The titles introduced on SmackDown in 2002. up until the unification, were by far the greater tag team division of the WWE. And that's why I think when they unified the belts in 2009 and then dissolved the World Tag Team title lineage in 2010, they decided to go with the WWE Tag Team because over the course of recent history, the SmackDown Tag titles, the WWE Tag Team titles that we use today, were a more prestigious lineage in terms of current WWE history.
Yeah, I just don't understand why they couldn't just keep the old lineage. But whatever. Whatever. And now, since 2010, the top WWE Tag Team Champions, who would you say? I mean, when I look at the teams over the past few years, I'd have to say the Usos.
The Usos were good.
Team Hell No.
Various teams of the Nexus. You had Slater and Gabriel. You had Cena and Otunga briefly. You had the Core.
I say greatest tag team.
I know. I'm just saying. The Nexus are actually good tag team champions. Not Cena and Otunga necessarily, but the other members of the Nexus were champions. The Shield were dominant tag team champions for a long, long time. Jericho, unified tag team champions. WWE tag team champions. They were awesome. Team Hell No, you mentioned the Rhodes Brothers. Cody and Goldust, Stardust and Goldust, whatever you want to call them, they were good tag team champions. But overall, as far as for the last 5 years, the Usos.
Yeah, I think
the Usos have been. And I know they're recent. I know that's cliche to say, but I think the Usos have been the dominant. They're 2-time tag team champions over the course of the last year and a half.
And just in terms of match quality, too, they've delivered.
But who really delivered and surprised me as a team, surprised a lot of people as a team, was Tyson Kidd and Cesaro. They were a great tag team champion. Unfortunately, Kidd got hurt.
Yeah. And,
who knows if he's going to come back ever the same. And it sucks. You like these guys. I like these guys individually, but not as a unit, and that's the New Day. They were interesting tag team champions. They've been a dominant tag team on Raw and SmackDown recently. So we'll see what happens going forward with those guys.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that WWE will continue to elevate the tag teams and make the tag teams a focal point and not just time filler. Which it seems like they were heading in the right direction a few years ago, and now they've kind of gone back to the way they were before.
Well, it seems the WWE tag team division does, much like the business itself, goes in cycles. They keep going back and forth between focusing on the tag teams and then not so much. It's the divas. They focus on them and then not so much. It's. I personally am a fan of the tag team wrestling. I'm not a fan of the triple threat matches or the fatal four ways or the 6-pack challenges, but I do like the classic 2-on-2 tag team matches. As well as the classic 1-on-1 matches or the Divas matches or whatever. But give me a good Primetime Players versus Usos, or Primetime Players versus the New Day, or Kidd and Cesaro now versus any tag team that's the old Shield team. They've got enough good tag teams where they could have a decent division. They just don't run with it. And it's a shame.
Yeah, it is. But hopefully things will pick up in WWE, and with that, we'll wrap things up for our thoughts on the greatest WWE Tag Team Champions in history. Leave a comment, youtube.com/NoDQCAW. Let us know your thoughts on the greatest Tag Team Champions. Thank you for being on, Jeff.
Of course.
Stay tuned to NoDQ.com for the very latest in the world of wrestling. We'll see you next time.